My name is Angela Hayes, 27 years old. I was standing under the gold leaf chandeliers of Belmont's, the kind of place where the napkins weigh more than your conscience, and my sister's voice sliced through the dining room like a champagne flute cracking. Go find another table. This one's for family, not adopted girls. Laughter skittered around the long, white tablecloth as if it had been trained to obey her. Patricia, my mother by papers, not by instinct, waved a manicured hand and murmured, "Oh, Victoria, like cruelty were a cute party trick." My father, Gregory, didn't look up. He was focused on cutting his steak into perfect, indifferent squares. Kenneth grinned into his wineglass and pretended not to watch me bleed. I felt every pair of eyes from nearby tables tilt toward the spectacle, the outsider standing with a clutch that suddenly felt like a brick and a face that burned hotter than the filet mignon. The crystal placed stars in everyone else's water. In mine, a reflection I didn't want to meet. Dorothy sat at the far end. Silver hair, posture a ruler could trust, her expression unreadable. You could mistake it for calm if you didn't know her. I knew better. She had the look she wore at business meetings when a partner forgot who built the table he was sitting at. "Sit down, Angela," my father said without looking up. "You're making a scene." I sat. Silence swallowed my protest the way the room swallowed my place in this family. Butter hissed on lobster in some unseen pan. A violin swam through hidden speakers. Belmonts could make anything sound refined, even humiliation. Victoria launched into a monologue about her new Mercedes convertible, the leather so soft it forgives your sins, and Kenneth interrupted to discuss his promotion at the bank. Patricia leaned forward, beaming with that polished pride reserved for kids who came from her body. I tried, careful, casual, to mention the new client I'd landed, a contract worth $50,000 over 6 months, a miracle I'd built with nothing but sleeplessness and stubbornness. "That's nice, dear," Patricia said, already turning back to Kenneth. "Tell us more about that bonus." The room narrowed to a tunnel. I could hear the rhythmic clink of fork on plate, could see the tremor in my own hand as I lifted my water. Dorothy didn't speak. She didn't need to. She watched. It felt like she was inventorying something only she could see. Dessert arrived with ornamental flourishes, spun sugar, a raspberry balanced like a jewel. That's when the waiter set the bill in front of me, leather folder, heavy as a verdict. I stared, blinking. "What's this?" "Oh, didn't we mention?" Victoria's laugh was bright and hard, glass tapping glass. "You're paying tonight, a contribution to the family." She put unnecessary weight on the word, like she was testing whether it would hold. "Taking, not giving," Patricia added, ticking imaginary lists on ringed fingers. "We've done so much for you, Angela. Roof over your head, food, clothes." They had a way of reminding me that love was a ledger, and I was perpetually overdrawn. I opened the folder. The number seemed to rise off the page as if it wanted to be seen by the entire city. $3,270. The wines were coded like passwords, vintages chosen because we wanted to be witness choosing them. Multiple appetizers, premium steaks, lobster tails. Kenneth had ordered 3 desserts because he liked the geometry of tasting flights. I did the math without moving my lips. 6 months of work on the contract spread across rent, software, taxes, the dried-out pens of a freelancer. This bill was a hand around the throat of my savings. "I can't afford this," I said, and the words were small enough to drown in a champagne flute. "Of course you can," Victoria purred. "Didn't you just say you're finally successful? Celebrate with us. It's almost like you're part of us." She tilted her head, a parody of sisterhood. Belmont's was designed to make every harsh thing sound civilized. Even my heartbeat took on a polite rhythm. I slid my credit card into the folder with a hand that didn't feel like mine. The waiter whisked it away without judgment, or perhaps with perfect professional judgment that looked like none at all. If humiliation is a temperature, it is fever. I smiled. I have learned that a smile can hold a person together like tape on a cracked vase. Victoria began outlining her upcoming trip to Tuscany, and Patricia made noises that meant she was already in the photographs. No one asked if I wanted to come. They never did, and if they had, they would have turned my no into an accusation. The waiter returned. I signed with fingers that barely obeyed me. $3,270 bought them a story to tell, and me another lesson. In this family, generosity is extracted like a tooth. Well, that was lovely, Patricia said, folding her napkin like a flag over surrender. Same time next month? Next month. The phrase balanced on the air, pretending to be light, waiting to crash. My mouth opened before I knew what it planned to say, but another voice spoke first. Just a moment, please. The dining room tightened. Dorothy had risen at the far end, and even the violin dimmed as if it knew the real instrument was her voice. Patricia's irritation leaked through her perfect smile. Mother, really? Sit, Dorothy said, and my mother sat. It is impossible to explain the authority of a woman who built a fortune while men told her to be grateful for chairs at tables they hadn't paid for. Dorothy's gaze traveled around the faces that mirrored one another's entitlement, then landed on me. Something flickered. Sadness, or inventory, or both. I'm 78 years old, Dorothy said, like a statement of capital. And I've spent months thinking about legacy. The word did not mean what this family thought it meant. You could see Victoria's ears prick at it anyway, like a cat hearing a can open. We all know how this works, Gregory said, trying for jocular and landing in anxious. Patricia is... Be quiet, Dorothy said, calm as a scalpel. I've watched you, she told them, not unkind but unrelenting, for years. And I've watched how you treat Angela. Tonight was only remarkable for its audacity. Victoria rolled her eyes so theatrically a lesser ceiling would have fallen. We were joking. Dorothy's laugh was a sound that used to buy companies. You think cruelty is a joke because you have always been safe from its bill. Conversation at other tables stalled. Some diners pretended to study menus they'd already memorized. Others surrendered to the show. I lowered my eyes because if I met Dorothy's, I might cry, and tears in this family were either taxed or mocked. She stepped away from her chair, slow but unshaken, and stopped behind mine. Her hand landed on my shoulder, light, certain. Angela is the only person at this table who has built something from nothing. The sentence arrived like an elevator opening to a floor with actual air. I've rewritten my will. Everything goes to her. The room forgot to breathe. Victoria's chair screeched. Kenneth's jaw clicked. Patricia's hand flew to her pearls, then to her mouth, confused about what was supposed to protect her. You can't do that, Victoria said, already half standing. That's not... I can, Dorothy replied, taking a phone from her bag. And I did. She pressed a button, and the knowledge that she had planned this, not tonight, but everything, moved through the table like weather. Thomas, file it. My father found his voice, the one he used at fundraisers for causes that never made him uncomfortable. Mother, let's be reasonable. Angela is... Family, Dorothy finished for him, and it wasn't a correction so much as a verdict, by choice and by character. I think the light changed, or maybe it was just me, noticing the way the chandeliers threw patterned circles on the tablecloths, like maps leading out. I could smell the sweetness of a lemon tart someone had just cut into. The world kept doing its job, indifferent to ours. I should have felt triumphant. I felt hollowed out by shock and the sharp edge of being seen. A lifetime of effort was suddenly not invisible. That kind of recognition is as destabilizing as a fall, even when it catches you. This is insane, Kenneth said, voice low, the banker calculating angles, not ethics. She doesn't know how to manage. She'll learn, Dorothy said. Unlike some, she knows what work is. Victoria's mouth twisted into something feral. You manipulative little... Enough, Dorothy said, and Victoria's word died in her throat like a moth that met a lamp too honestly. I realized then that Belmont's hush wasn't reverent. It was anticipatory. The room leaned toward us. Strangers waited at the edge of our family's cliff, prepared to gasp when we tumbled. Dorothy squeezed my shoulder once. It was not an apology for time. It was a key. Get your bag, Angela, she said softly, to me alone. We're leaving. I reached for my clutch. The leather felt different now, like it might open to more than receipts. As I stood, my chair legs didn't scrape. I had learned to move quietly in rooms that needed me to be louder to justify what they called me. Victoria hissed, "This isn't over," and it sounded like a promise from someone who believed wars were won by whoever could scream without swallowing their tongue. No, Dorothy agreed, already turning. It's finally begun. We walked past white tablecloths and specular glass and the performance of old money. Outside, Seattle's night air climbed into my lungs like a rescue. A black car idled at the curb. Thomas stepped out, as if he'd been waiting in exactly this moment for years. Only he and Dorothy knew were inevitable. Behind us, the restaurant door side closed, and for a second, all I could see was my reflection in the glass. No family framed behind me, just a woman who had survived their jokes long enough to hear the punchline wasn't her. Dorothy's hand found mine. "Tomorrow," she said, soft enough that only the cold heard it too. "We start making sure they can never hurt you again." Across the street, a neon sign flickered, its hum a nervous animal. Somewhere in the dark, a violinist kept playing the same phrase Belmont's had swallowed. It sounded different out here, imperfect, true. The car door shut with a heavy click, sealing me into silence that hummed with possibilities I didn't dare name. I sat stiffly, staring at the blur of city lights as Thomas pulled us into Seattle's night traffic. Dorothy sat beside me, her posture unbent, her silver hair catching passing neon like threads of mercury. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The quiet wasn't awkward. It was weighted, like the pause before a verdict is read aloud. Finally, Dorothy said, "They've mistaken silence for weakness all their lives. Tonight they learned the difference." She didn't look at me when she said it. She didn't have to. My throat thickened, a swell of emotion pushing against years of carefully managed composure. All I managed was a whispered, "Why me? Why everything?" Dorothy's gaze shifted from the window to me. Her eyes were sharp but soft around the edges, a paradox I'd always associated with her, because you've carried yourself with dignity while they tried to bury you under cruelty, and because, her hand brushed mine, my time is shorter than they know. I need to put things in place while I can still protect you. I swallowed, startled by the raw finality threaded through her calm. "What do you mean shorter?" Dorothy exhaled, a sound that felt too heavy for the elegant interior. "We'll discuss it in the morning. Tonight, you rest." The car turned into a gated estate tucked away behind iron and hedges. The mansion rose in the dark like something from a storybook written in steel and glass. When Thomas opened my door, the winter air hit me, sharp and bracing, as if daring me to step into a different life. Inside, warmth spilled over marble floors and high ceilings. I should have felt awe. Instead, I felt out of place, like a child sneaking into a palace that wasn't hers. Dorothy caught the hesitation on my face. "This is your home now," she said simply, leading me down a hall lined with portraits, her younger self shaking hands with presidents, holding pharmaceutical awards, breaking ground at hospitals. Her life stared down at me in oil and photograph, daring me to measure up. Thomas showed me to a guest room where the bedding looked untouched by human history. I sat on the edge of the bed, my phone buzzing like an angry insect in my purse. When I pulled it out, the screen was a litany of missed calls and texts. "Victoria, you think you've won? You'll regret this." "Kenneth, we need to talk. Don't destroy the family over money." "Patricia, ungrateful girl, after all we've done for you." "Gregory, call me back. We can negotiate." My thumb hovered, then dropped the phone back on the nightstand. I turned off the ringer. For once, I wanted silence unbroken by their voices. Sleep came late and shallow, haunted by fragments. Victoria's face twisted in fury, Patricia's pearls trembling against her throat, Kenneth's smirk fading to calculation, Gregory's silence weaponized, as always. I woke with sunlight spilling across silk sheets, disoriented until memory returned, with a rush that almost knocked the breath from me. Belmont's, the will. Dorothy's hand on my shoulder. A knock sounded at the door. Thomas's voice. "Miss Angela, breakfast is ready. Miss Dorothy requests you in the study after." Downstairs, the dining table looked like a magazine spread. China, polished silver, fresh flowers. But my appetite was gone. I sipped coffee, the bitterness a match for my mood, before heading toward the study. The study was all mahogany and authority, the kind of room that demanded truth. Dorothy sat behind an enormous desk, surprisingly alert for someone who'd detonated her family the night before. Beside her stood Walter, a man in a tailored suit whose handshake was firm, his eyes quick. "Angela," Dorothy said, gesturing me closer. "This is Walter. He's my attorney. We have things to discuss." Walter opened a leather folio, sliding documents across the desk. "Your grandmother has asked me to walk you through the trust structure, the transfer of assets, and some other matters you'll want to know." The words blurred. Billions, properties, investments, stakes in companies whose logos I'd only ever seen on ads in airport terminals. My stomach knotted. This wasn't just inheritance. It was an empire. Then Dorothy's voice sharpened. Before you drown in numbers, there's something you need to see. She slid another folder forward, thinner but heavier in meaning. Bank records, transfers, a total, $750,000. What is this? I asked, though some dark part of me already knew. When Patricia and Gregory adopted you, Dorothy said quietly, they received this sum. It came from a trust your birth parents established before their deaths. It was meant for your care, your education, your life. I flipped through the pages, each line stabbing deeper. Vacations, cars, private schools, Kenneth's tuition, Victoria's luxuries, my name nowhere. My own college debt, my secondhand clothes, my childhood of being told we can't afford it, and here was proof. They could. They chose not to. They stole it, I whispered, my throat raw. Dorothy's nod was heavy. Yes, they spent what was yours on everyone but you. I discovered it 2 years ago. I've been gathering documentation ever since. The room spun. Rage roared like blood in my ears. It wasn't just emotional cruelty, it was theft. Cold, calculated theft. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I demanded. Half accusation, half plea. Dorothy's eyes softened. Because once you knew, there would be no turning back, no chance, however small, of reconciliation. And because I needed the evidence to be airtight, now it is. The study blurred around me, the shelves of legal books, the faint tick of a clock. My world had tilted. The family I had begged for scraps of affection hadn't just withheld love, they'd profited from my loss. Walter's voice cut through. We've filed a civil suit. With interest over 22 years, they owe you approximately $2.3 million. As if summoned, my phone buzzed again. This time, Gregory. My hand shook as I answered. Hello? Angela, his voice, desperate. Please, we need to talk. Your grandmother isn't thinking clearly. This isn't right. She seems perfectly clear to me, I said, steadying my tone. She's manipulating you, he snapped. No, I said, heat rising. The bank records don't lie. You stole from me, from a grieving child. A beat of silence. Then Patricia's voice, shrill, cutting through on speaker. That money was for raising you, for food, housing, clothing. You mean the hand-me-downs? The forgotten birthdays? The student loans you refused to help with? My voice cracked, but didn't falter. You gave Victoria private school and Kenneth a new car. You gave me nothing. You're ungrateful, Gregory hissed. We gave you a home. You gave me a prison, I said, and you made me thank you for the bars. Patricia's tone turned icy. We'll fight this. We'll take you to court. Dorothy leaned forward, her voice like steel. Please do. I'd love to see you explain to a judge how you spent $750,000 meant for a child's care on luxury vacations and designer wardrobes. There was a click, then silence. They'd hung up. My hand was still trembling around the phone when Dorothy placed hers gently over mine. They will come for you, Angela. Desperation makes people dangerous, but you are not alone. Not anymore. Her words should have comforted me. Instead, they were a promise that the battle was only beginning. The call had barely ended before my phone lit up again. This time it wasn't just one message, it was a flood. Notifications stacked like accusations. Victoria, you'll regret siding with her. You think money makes you family? Kenneth, don't do this. We can work it out. We'll all lose if you push it this far. Patricia, ungrateful brat, after all the sacrifices we made. Unknown number, gold digger. Everyone knows what you're doing. My thumb hovered, then I turned the phone off entirely. The silence that followed wasn't peace. It was pressure, the kind that builds before a storm. Dorothy's lawyer, Walter, tapped his folder as though to ground me. The next step will be a press strategy. The leak is inevitable. Once news spreads that Dorothy has changed her will, the narrative will be theirs unless we take control. Theirs, my voice came sharper than I meant. They'll paint you as manipulative, as opportunistic, the adopted outsider who wormed her way into billions. We've seen it before. I almost laughed. Bitter. Hollow. They've been painting me as an outsider since I was 5. This will just give them brighter colors. Dorothy studied me, her face illuminated by morning light cutting through the blinds. You survived their cruelty for 22 years, Angela. You'll survive this. But survival isn't enough anymore. Now you fight. The word fight vibrated in my chest. I'd spent my life swallowing pain like it was mandatory. Now Dorothy was handing me a weapon, and it scared me as much as it thrilled me. That night the world proved Walter right. I woke to my phone buzzing against the nightstand. Dozens of alerts from social media I hadn't touched in months. Headlines blared. Billionaire matriarch cuts children from will, leaves fortune to adopted daughter. Insiders question if Dorothy Hayes is of sound mind. Gold digger or survivor. Internet divided over Angela Hayes. Scrolling was like dragging my skin across glass. Strangers debated my worth like it was a sport. Anonymous profiles spit venom. She played the long game. Probably seduced the old woman. Another. She deserves it. Blood isn't family. Loyalty is. I slammed the phone shut, bile rising in my throat. My chest felt tight, as though humiliation were carbon monoxide seeping into my lungs. Dorothy found me hunched over in the library, laptop glow painting my face pale. "Stop feeding yourself poison," she said, sliding the screen shut with a decisive hand. "They're calling me things I can't even repeat." "They called me worse when I built my first company," Dorothy replied, sinking into the chair beside me. "Said I was too ambitious, too ruthless, too masculine. They wanted me to apologize for existing outside their script." Her hand found mine, papery but strong. "The world doesn't get to write your story, Angela. You do." I wanted to believe her, but when I closed my eyes, all I saw was Victoria's smirk splashed across a headline, Kenneth's rehearsed frown on the evening news, Patricia's crocodile tears sliding down a pearl white blouse. They knew how to manipulate perception. I only knew how to endure it. By morning, it wasn't just digital voices against me. Thomas met me at the breakfast table, tension stiffening his shoulders. "There are reporters outside the gates. Dozens." Dorothy nodded calmly, buttering her toast as though she were planning a picnic. "Good. If they want a show, we'll give them one. On our terms." Walter frowned. "Are you suggesting a press conference?" "I'm not suggesting," Dorothy said. "I'm deciding. We'll call every camera in Seattle and lay out the truth. The stolen trust. The records, the cruelty, everything." My stomach lurched. "Me? On camera?" "You," Dorothy confirmed. "They need to hear your voice, not just mine. You don't need speeches. You need truth. Truth is unpolished. That's why it cuts." The thought of it made my pulse pound in my ears. But Dorothy's eyes, unwavering and fierce despite the shadows of illness, left no room for retreat. Later that afternoon, as if rehearsing the storm, Kenneth arrived at the estate. He looked nothing like the polished banker who sneered at me last night. His tie was loose, his jaw rough with stubble. Thomas intercepted him in the foyer, but I stepped forward. "Let her talk to me," I said, surprising even myself. Kenneth's eyes met mine, bloodshot and restless. "Angela, please, this has gone too far. You can't destroy us like this." I almost laughed. Destroy? They had spent decades tearing me apart piece by piece, and now when the mirror cracked, suddenly I was the villain. "The family fell apart a long time ago," I said coldly. "You just didn't notice until money was involved." "That's not fair," he said, desperation leaking through his practiced tone. "I know we weren't perfect, but to cut us out entirely? That's extreme." My hands shook, but the words came anyway. Extreme was watching you push me into a pool at 12, knowing I couldn't swim, while everyone laughed. Extreme was wearing thrift store shoes while Victoria got designer. Extreme was you all burning through $750,000, meant for me while I scrubbed dishes to pay my tuition. That was extreme, Kenneth. His face paled. "I didn't know about the money, I swear." "You didn't know because you never asked," I shot back. "You never asked about me at all." He opened his mouth again, but I'd already turned to Thomas. "Escort him out." As Kenneth's footsteps retreated, Dorothy's words from the night before rang in my ears. "Now you fight." And the battlefield was waiting. Cameras, headlines, and the family who'd rather burn me alive than let me inherit their ashes. The morning of the press conference, the estate felt like a fortress under siege. Reporters clustered at the gates, their shouts muffled by distance but still sharp enough to pierce the walls. From the study window, I could see satellite vans lined down the street, cameras glinting in the pale Seattle light. Strangers held signs, some cheering me on, others calling me a parasite. Inside, Walter paced, phone glued to his ear, while Thomas directed extra security to the doors. The air was heavy with brewed coffee and quiet dread. Dorothy sat in her armchair, a silk scarf wrapped around her shoulders, her face paler than usual, but her posture unbending. "You're nervous," she said, watching me twist the hem of my sleeve. "I'm terrified," I admitted. "What if I stumble? What if I say something wrong?" Dorothy smiled faintly. the kind of smile that came from seeing storms before and walking through them. Truth doesn't stumble, Angela. Lies do. All you have to do is tell the truth and let the world see it in your eyes. I wanted to believe her, but when Walter finally put his phone down and said, "They're ready for us," my legs felt like glass about to shatter. The conference was held in the downtown office of Hayes Pharmaceuticals, a skyscraper of glass and steel that bore Dorothy's empire in its reflection. The lobby was packed, cameras and microphones creating a forest of scrutiny. Flashes exploded as soon as we appeared. Thomas guided us through, his presence cutting a path like a blade through fog. We took our seats at the long table, Dorothy in the center, Walter on her right, me on her left. The lights were hot, the air charged with hunger, reporters poised to feast on whatever scraps of narrative we dropped. Dorothy began. Her voice, though softened by illness, carried the weight of decades spent commanding rooms larger than this. "Thank you for coming. I called this conference to address the rumors surrounding my estate and my granddaughter, Angela Hayes." Granddaughter, not adopted, not ward. The word landed like a shield. She laid it all out. The $750,000 adoption trust, the bank records, the years of neglect and humiliation. She held up medical evaluations confirming her sound mind, witness statements, photos. Everything Walter had prepared, Dorothy delivered with precision. The room buzzed with scribbling pens and clicking keys. Reporters exchanged glances as if the narrative they'd expected was slipping from their hands. Then Dorothy looked at me. Angela would like to say a few words. My mouth went dry. Every eye turned toward me, heavy and expectant. I leaned into the microphone, heart pounding. "I don't know what to say that my grandmother hasn't already said. I never wanted this attention. I never wanted to be rich or to be the center of some public spectacle. All I ever wanted was a family that loved me." A murmur rippled through the room. My throat tightened, but I forced myself to keep going. Instead, I was reminded daily that I was different, that I was less. I worked for everything I have, while they spent money meant for me on themselves. I didn't ask for Dorothy's fortune. I didn't even know about it until the night they humiliated me at Belmont's. I looked straight into the cameras. Some of you will still call me a gold digger, a manipulator. That's fine. Believe what you want, but know this. I am not here because of greed. I am here because someone finally saw me as family when no one else did. Applause broke out, not from the reporters, but from the crowd gathered outside. It filtered through the glass, muffled but undeniable. I blinked hard, fighting tears. That's when the doors burst open. "Lies!" Victoria's voice cracked through the room like lightning. She stormed in, hair disheveled, makeup smeared, her designer dress wrinkled. Security rushed forward, but she'd already shoved past the first line of cameras. "She brainwashed you all. I'm the real victim here." Flashes erupted as reporters swiveled toward her, scenting chaos. "Miss Victoria," a reporter called, "what about the allegation your parents misused Angela's adoption trust?" Victoria sneered, mascara streaking down her cheeks. "That money was ours. We earned it raising her ungrateful ass." Gasps. Pens froze mid-word. Cameras zoomed in like predators locking onto prey. Walter's lips curved almost imperceptibly. Another reporter pressed, "Are you admitting the trust meant for Angela was spent on your family?" Victoria's eyes widened as she realized her slip. "No, I mean, She stuttered, her fury unraveling into incoherence. "Get her out," Walter said calmly, and security moved. Victoria screamed insults as she was dragged from the room, her voice echoing down the hallway. "This isn't over. She'll ruin us all." The silence that followed was electric. Reporters bent over their phones, typing furiously, broadcasting the confession that had just torpedoed Victoria's credibility. Beside me, Dorothy leaned closer and whispered, "Just for me. Sometimes justice doesn't need a plan. It just needs a stage." And I realized then that the stage wasn't theirs anymore. It was ours. The video of Victoria's meltdown spread like fire before we even left the conference room. By the time Thomas escorted us back to the car, my phone was buzzing with alerts I didn't dare open. Crowds outside shouted my name, not just with insults this time, but with cheers, applause. Hands thrust out as though they could touch the story through me. In the back seat, I leaned against the cool glass, heart still racing. Dorothy sat beside me, frailer than she had that morning, but there was a spark in her eyes. "Well," she murmured, "I don't think we could have planned that better if we tried." Walter chuckled, already scrolling through his phone. "Every outlet is running the clip. Her words, on camera, admitting to the misuse of the trust fund. Any case they had just collapsed. Collapsed. The word should have felt like victory. Instead, all I felt was exhaustion. That night at the estate, I couldn't sleep. My mind replayed the press conference like a broken reel. The way my voice had cracked when I said I just wanted a family. The way Victoria's fury had boiled over. The collective gasp when she confessed without realizing. Each image flickered in the dark until my phone lit up again. A message from Kenneth. We need to talk. Privately. Don't let them destroy us all. I didn't answer. I couldn't. The court date arrived 3 days later. Seattle's courthouse looked gray and indifferent against the rain, but the swarm of cameras outside turned it into a stage. Protesters held signs, some painted with my name in bright colors, others with the word thief scrawled in red. Walter had arranged a private entrance, but even in the echoing corridors, I could hear the noise outside. Dorothy insisted on coming, though by then she'd finally agreed to the wheelchair. She looked small, wrapped in a cashmere shawl, but her back remained straight, her eyes unyielding. I wheeled her into the courtroom, heart hammering. On the other side sat Patricia and Gregory, dressed in muted colors, faces carefully schooled into sorrow. Kenneth avoided my eyes, and Victoria, her glare could have cracked stone. Judge Morrison entered, her presence instantly quieting the room. This is the matter of the contested will of Dorothy Hayes, she began. The family's lawyer went first, painting me as manipulative, Dorothy as frail and confused. He spoke of undue influence, of a granddaughter who appeared out of nowhere to claim billions. His words were slick, polished, rehearsed. Then Walter stood. He didn't waste time on rhetoric. He presented facts, bank records tracing every stolen dollar, medical evaluations from 3 doctors declaring Dorothy of sound mind, witness testimony of years of neglect and humiliation, and finally, Victoria's viral video projected on the courtroom screen. Her voice filled the chamber. That money was ours. We earned it raising her ungrateful ass. The silence afterward was brutal. Even Patricia lowered her head, knowing the damage was irreversible. Walter closed simply. This is not undue influence. This is justice long delayed. The judge's ruling was swift, her words crisp. The evidence is overwhelming. The contest is dismissed with prejudice. The will stands as executed. Furthermore, Patricia and Gregory Hayes are ordered to repay the misappropriated $750,000, plus accrued interest, totaling approximately $2.3 million. Restitution is to be paid within 90 days. The gavel struck. Final. Patricia collapsed into her chair, sobbing. Gregory looked like a man who'd aged 10 years in one breath. Kenneth buried his face in his hands. Victoria leapt to her feet, screaming obscenities until bailiffs restrained her. And me? I sat frozen, unable to process that the fight we'd braced for was over. We had won. Dorothy reached for my hand, her grip trembling but strong. It's done, sweetheart, she whispered. You're free. Outside, the world erupted, media swarming, microphones thrust forward, cameras blinding. Questions hurled like stones. How do you feel? What will you do with the money? Do you have a message for your family? But I said nothing. I just held Dorothy's hand and let Thomas guide us through. Back at the estate, Dorothy leaned into her chair, exhausted but content. I can die happy now, she said softly. My chest clenched. Don't say that. Oh, Angela. She cupped my cheek with a frail hand. I got to see justice done. To know my life's work will be used for good. That's more than most people ever get. I couldn't speak past the lump in my throat. I just held her hand tighter, as though grip alone could anchor her here. Over the next weeks, Dorothy faded. Some days she was lucid, sharp, still giving instructions to Walter and Thomas. Other days she drifted, caught in memories I couldn't see. I sat by her bed, reading drafts of the foundation I'd begun outlining, the Dorothy Hayes Foundation for Adopted Children. That's perfect, she's whispered one evening when I described offering legal aid and housing for children trapped in abusive families. Help them break the cycle. I will, I promised. You already have, she said, smiling weakly. She died on a Tuesday morning. The sun streamed through the window, painting her silver hair in light. Her last words were simple. Thank you for being my real family. I stayed there long after, holding her hand, tears wetting the sheets. The only person who had ever truly loved me was gone, but she had left me more than money. She had left me a truth that love is proven, not proclaimed. The funeral was private. Just me, Thomas, Walter, and a few of Dorothy's oldest friends. My family wasn't invited. Patricia tried to come anyway, weeping at the gates until security turned her away. The irony didn't escape me. She wanted to mourn the woman whose fortune she'd spent decades coveting, not the one whose love she had squandered. Afterward, standing beneath the gray sky as the casket lowered, I felt both hollow and whole. Dorothy was gone, but she had handed me her legacy. What I did with it would define me more than their hatred ever could. And for the first time, I believed I could build something better than survival. The weeks after Dorothy's funeral felt unreal, like walking through a house where the furniture was the same, but gravity had shifted. The estate was quiet, almost too quiet, yet I felt her presence in every polished surface and every lingering scent of lilac and vanilla. Walter moved quickly. Transfers, filings, signatures. The numbers he spoke were still incomprehensible. $3 billion in liquid assets, $5 billion in property and investments, companies I'd only ever seen in headlines now listed under my stewardship. I stared at contracts with my name printed where hers used to be, feeling like an imposter in someone else's skin. Dorothy had believed in me enough to place an empire in my hands, but belief and readiness weren't the same thing. At night, I lay awake, scrolling through endless messages, some from strangers, support, admiration, even proposals of marriage from men I'd never met. Others from my so-called family. Kenneth, Mom is falling apart. Dad can't sleep. Please, Angela, you've proved your point. Don't let us drown. Patricia, you can't erase 22 years. We're still your parents. We still love you. Victoria, you'll pay for this. I swear you'll pay. I blocked her, but the echo of her fury followed me into sleep. The foundation became my anchor. Walter brought in a team, and together we began shaping Dorothy's last wish into something tangible. Emergency housing, legal defense, scholarships for adopted children who were exploited or abandoned. Each draft I read felt like reclaiming another piece of myself, like rewriting the story my family had tried to script for me. But outside the estate walls, the public spectacle only grew. One morning, Thomas handed me the paper. The headline screamed, "Hayes family in ruin. Disinherited daughter speaks out." Beneath it, Patricia's photo filled the page. She sat in a dim living room, face bare of makeup, her hands trembling as though caught mid-prayer. "I loved Angela like my own," the interview quoted. "I was strict, yes, but only because I wanted her to be strong. I never stopped loving her. Now she's turned against us, and it's tearing this family apart." The article painted her as tragic, a grieving mother stripped of her daughter and fortune by a manipulative matriarch and a vengeful adoptee. I threw the paper down, anger spiking through my chest. "She's lying." Walter read calmly, his expression unreadable. "Of course she is, but perception is its own kind of trial." "She makes herself look like a saint," I snapped. "She never loved me. She never even tried." Thomas set a hand on my shoulder. "Some people will believe her, but the ones who matter know the truth." Still, I couldn't shake the unease. It was one thing to survive cruelty in private. It was another to have the world debate whether your pain was even real. And then came the news I hadn't expected. Gregory and Patricia couldn't repay the $2.3 million restitution. The court seized their house, their cars, their accounts. Gregory was charged with fraud for falsifying the trust records. He faced 3 years in prison. Patricia received 2. Kenneth's portion was smaller but devastating. Nearly $400,000 to repay. His marriage cracked under the strain, his wife leaving with their child. He picked up 2 jobs, a shadow of the polished banker he once was. And Victoria, her fall was the loudest. The viral video had destroyed her credibility. Her husband divorced her. The restaurant venture she poured money into collapsed. The private investigator she'd hired was suing her for unpaid fees. She launched a YouTube channel, begging for sympathy, but the comment section shredded her until she deleted it. Desperation drove her to me. One evening, an email arrived. Subject, Sisters. From Victoria Hayes. Message, Angela. I know we've had our differences, but we're still family. Family forgives. I'm struggling right now. Maybe we could meet for coffee, talk about the past, build a future together. Please. I read it once, then deleted it. 6 months after Dorothy's death, I stood in the new headquarters of the Dorothy Hayes Foundation. The walls gleamed with photographs of children we'd already helped, faces alight with second chances. Thomas stood beside me, now serving as the foundation's operations director. "She'd be proud," he said. I nodded, blinking back tears. "I hope so." My phone buzzed again. Kenneth this time. "Mom's out of prison. Dad's health is failing. They have nothing. Please, can't you forgive them? Help them?" I typed carefully, every word deliberate. They were never my parents. They were people who took money to raise me and used me as a punching bag instead. I owe them nothing, but I'll make a deal. I'll donate the exact amount they stole, $750,000, to help adopted kids escape abusive families, in their names. That will be their only legacy. I hit send, then blocked his number too. A year later, a business magazine featured me, not as the adopted girl who inherited billions, but as a CEO, a philanthropist, a builder. The article focused on the companies thriving under my leadership and the foundation that had already saved hundreds of children. My family was barely mentioned, a footnote in the story they once dominated. From acquaintances, I heard scraps: Victoria in telemarketing, Patricia in a shelter, Gregory still behind bars, Kenneth bankrupt, his pride gnawing at whatever future he had left. Sometimes I wondered if I should feel pity. Sometimes I almost did, but mostly I felt nothing except the quiet satisfaction that cruelty eventually eats itself. Dorothy had been right. Survival wasn't enough. Justice wasn't about their ruin, it was about building something beautiful from the ashes. And as I stood in the foundation's lobby, watching children laugh in the playroom we'd built, I realized the best revenge had never been destruction. It was becoming everything they swore I couldn't be. 2 years after Dorothy's death, I had learned to live in a world that finally felt like mine. The estate no longer felt borrowed. It breathed with me, carried my rhythms, echoed with my decisions. The foundation was thriving, its name on the lips of every child who'd been pulled from the shadows and given shelter, food, a chance. But the past has a way of clawing at the present. One morning, Walter arrived with a folder thicker than usual. "There's something you should see," he said, his voice measured. Inside were court documents. Victoria, predictably, had filed yet another lawsuit, this time claiming emotional damages from the inheritance scandal, blaming me for her failed marriage and ruined career. She was demanding $5 million in compensation. I almost laughed. She never learns. Walter's mouth curved faintly. "The case won't hold, but she's doing it for attention, publicity, to stir noise. She's drowning," I said, "and she's trying to pull me under with her." By then, I'd grown used to the attacks. Whispers online, speculative articles, the occasional ambush by a reporter outside the foundation's doors. They no longer pierced the way they once had. But Victoria's desperation felt different. It was unhinged, unpredictable, dangerous. Later that week, Thomas intercepted a letter at the gate. No return address. The handwriting jagged, rushed. I unfolded it and read, "You think you've won, Angela, but money can't buy blood. You'll always be the outsider. One day everyone will see you for what you are." No signature, but it didn't need one. The ink reeked of Victoria. I burned the letter in the fireplace and watched the ashes curl. Still, the reminder pressed against me that though my name now commanded boardrooms and charities, I would always carry the scar of belonging nowhere. And yet, there were moments when the wound softened. One evening, after a long day at the foundation, I walked through the lobby just as a young girl arrived with a social worker. She couldn't have been more than 9, clutching a threadbare teddy bear, her eyes wide and wary. She looked at me the way I once looked at the world, like it was waiting to hurt her. I knelt down. "Hi, I am Angela. This place is safe. No one here will laugh at you or call you less." Her grip on the teddy loosened just enough for her to whisper, "Promise?" "I promise," I said, and I meant it with every piece of me. That night, alone in my study, I opened Dorothy's old leather journal, one I hadn't been able to read since she died. On the first page, in her looping handwriting, she'd written, "Legacy is not wealth. It is the lives we touch, the chains we break, the futures we build." If Angela is reading this, then I did at least one thing right. Tears blurred the words. I closed the book carefully, like it might shatter. The battles with my family weren't truly over. Maybe they never would be. Gregory's health was failing in prison. Patricia was living in obscurity, her voice lost to the same silence she once forced on me. Kenneth still circled with half-hearted pleas for reconciliation, though I'd learned his guilt was always tied to convenience. And Victoria, her spiral was endless, her threats louder than her reality. But their downfall no longer defined me. What defined me were the children who ran laughing through the Foundation's halls, the businesses thriving under my guidance, the nights I slept without rehearsing comebacks to insults. Justice had already been served in court. The rest of it, their ruin, their regrets, was just gravity taking its course. As for me, I carried Dorothy's voice with me into every boardroom, every courtroom, every quiet conversation with a child who needed someone to believe them. Her last words still lived in me. Thank you for being my real family. And now, finally, I was building one, out of strangers, out of survivors, out of the ashes of everything my old family tried to destroy. The best revenge had never been wealth, it was becoming unbreakable. And I was. 3 years had passed since that night at Belmont's when Dorothy rose from her chair and rewrote every line of my life. Time hadn't erased the scars, but it had carved new landscapes over them. The Foundation had grown beyond anything I imagined. We had offices in 3 states now, shelters filled with laughter instead of fear, scholarships carrying adopted children through schools their parents never believed they deserved. Sometimes I would walk the halls quietly, unnoticed, listening to the sound of safety being lived out loud. Those were the moments I felt Dorothy most, like she was watching, nodding, satisfied. But even with all this progress, shadows still lingered. One rainy evening, as I was leaving the Foundation headquarters, Thomas caught my arm. His face was grim in the lamplight. There's something you need to hear. He handed me a phone. On the screen was a shaky video already spreading online. Victoria again. Her hair unkempt, her eyes wild, sitting in a dimly lit room. She stole everything from us, Victoria hissed into the camera. Our parents, our money, our future. She's not family. She's a fraud. And mark my words, people like her never win in the end. The comments were vicious, half of them mocking her, half of them feeding the fire. I closed the phone slowly. She's unraveling, I said. Thomas's jaw tightened. Unraveling people are dangerous. He was right. 2 nights later, security cameras caught Victoria parked outside the estate gates at midnight, shouting at the guards, demanding to be let in. When they refused, she hurled bottles until the police arrived. Walter assured me the restraining order would hold. Every outburst she makes strengthens our case against her, he said. She's burying herself. But I couldn't shake the unease, because even if the law was on my side, blood had a way of finding cracks to seep through. One afternoon, Kenneth managed to reach me through a business contact. We met at a cafe downtown, my choice of public ground. He looked thinner, his suit worn, a man hollowed out by debts he couldn't repay. Angela, he began, his voice softer than I remembered. I know you don't owe us anything, but can't you at least forgive? Carrying hate this long, it eats at a person. I stared at him across the table, remembering the boy who once pushed me into a pool and laughed as I choked on water. I don't carry hate, Kenneth, I said evenly. I carry truth. There's a difference. He flinched, but pressed on. Mom is sick. Dad's worse. Victoria's gone off the rails. We're falling apart. You have the power to help us. I sipped my coffee, steady. And where was your power when I was the one falling apart? Where was it when I needed someone to call me family? His eyes dropped. I can't change the past. No, I said, and I can't change what you all chose. You built your house on cruelty. Now it's collapsing. That's not on me. I left him sitting there, staring into his empty cup as if it might explain how a family could squander love until nothing remained. Back at the estate, I walked the gardens Dorothy once tended. Rain clung to the roses, the air rich with earth. I could almost hear her voice. Survival isn't the end, Angela. It's the beginning. She was right. Their downfall no longer fed me. My life wasn't about them anymore. It was about the children whose names I now knew, whose futures I could help shape. It was about turning wounds into blueprints, scars into stepping stones. One evening, a little girl at the shelter slipped her hand into mine without a word. She had the same wary eyes I once carried, the same tremor in her shoulders. You're safe now, I told her, and realized I was saying it to myself too. For the first time, I felt it was true. Dorothy's legacy wasn't money. It was this, the unbroken chain of protection, the proof that cruelty can end where someone chooses to say enough. And I had chosen. 4 years after Dorothy's passing, I stood on a stage in New York, the lights of a global philanthropy summit washing over me. Behind me, a screen glowed with images of children we had saved through the foundation, faces that once knew only fear, now alive with possibility. The applause was thunderous, but it wasn't for me. It was for them, for what Dorothy had set in motion. When the cameras flashed, I thought briefly of Belmont's, the chandeliers, the laughter, the sting of humiliation as that bill slid across the table. I remembered the weight of my credit card in my hand, the heat in my face, the silence that followed, and I remembered Dorothy rising, steady as iron, changing everything with a single decision. Now I was the one at the table, and this time I was the one deciding who got fed. But no victory is without ghosts. Even as the summit crowned the foundation as one of the fastest-growing humanitarian efforts in the country, a headline scrolled across my phone during the flight home. Victoria Hayes found unconscious in motel, condition critical. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. When I landed, Walter was waiting. His expression was grim. Overdose. She survived, but barely. A part of me wanted to feel something sharp. Anger, satisfaction, pity. Instead, all I felt was a dull ache, like pressing on an old bruise. She did it to herself, I said quietly. Yes, Walter agreed. But you should prepare yourself. The media will try to drag you into it. They'll say her downfall was the cost of your rise. And they did. Articles spun narratives of the golden child and the fallen sister, of wealth that healed one and ruined another. Strangers online debated whether I'd abandoned her, whether Dorothy's fortune had cursed us all. I didn't respond. Some battles aren't worth fighting. Weeks later, Kenneth showed up again, this time at the foundation, in the lobby crowded with volunteers and children. His suit was worse than before, his tie askew, but his eyes, they carried something I hadn't seen in years. Not calculation, not pity, just exhaustion. I'm sorry, he said simply, for all of it, for not standing up when I should have, for letting them tear you apart. I can't fix what's broken, Angela, but I need you to know I regret it. His words cracked something in me I didn't realize was still brittle. I didn't forgive him, not yet, maybe not ever, but for the first time, I believed he might actually mean it. Regret isn't the same as change, I told him softly. If you want to be different, prove it. Not to me, to yourself. He nodded, eyes wet, and walked out. That night, as I watched the city lights flicker across the lake from the estate windows, I realized the story had shifted. I was no longer the girl begging for scraps of love. I was no longer the woman defending herself in court. I was something else now, something they could never name, because it wasn't written in their language of cruelty and entitlement. It was written in the laughter of children, in scholarships signed, in homes rebuilt. Dorothy's last gift to me wasn't just her fortune, it was the freedom to decide what legacy meant. And my choice was clear. The best revenge was never their ruin. It was becoming unshakable, undeniable, unbreakable. It was building a family out of strangers and survivors, out of anyone who needed proof that cruelty could end. And every day, I chose it again. 5 years had passed. Sometimes it still startled me how fast everything had changed, and yet how deeply some wounds still whispered. The Dorothy Hayes Foundation had expanded internationally now. Projects in London, Nairobi, Manila. Children's laughter echoed in places Dorothy never lived to see. Her name was engraved on schools, shelters, and clinics, each brick a small rebellion against the cruelty I had once endured. But the past was never gone. One autumn afternoon, Walter walked into my office carrying an envelope. His face gave it away before his words did. "It's from Patricia," he said quietly. I stared at the envelope like it was venom. My hands hesitated before taking it. The handwriting was delicate, careful, as if she'd practiced the words before committing them to paper. I unfolded the letter. Angela, I don't expect forgiveness. Prison humbles people, and I am not who I once was. Your father is dying, and I am alone. I see now the mistakes we made, though perhaps too late. I wanted to tell you. I did love you in the only way I knew how. I hope one day you'll understand, even if you can't forgive. Patricia. I read it 3 times. Each line scraped something raw inside me. Did she mean it? Or was it another manipulation, softer this time, dressed in frailty instead of pearls? I didn't know, and maybe I didn't need to. I burned the letter in the fireplace. Watching the edges curl, I whispered to myself, love that hides behind cruelty isn't love, it's control. Still, that night I dreamed of her hand tightening on my shoulder as she told me to be grateful. her voice hissing in the dark when no one else could hear. I woke with tears on my face, furious at myself for letting her linger. Meanwhile, Kenneth had kept his word. Slowly, steadily, he began volunteering at the foundation. Not with fanfare, not with speeches, just showing up to tutor teenagers, to drive kids to appointments, to listen. The children didn't know him as my brother. They only knew him as Mr. Hayes, who helped with homework and laughed at their jokes. And maybe that was enough. Victoria, though, her story grew darker. She drifted between odd jobs and online rants, each one more desperate than the last. Then, one winter morning, the news broke. Victoria Hayes arrested for fraud, police confirm elaborate scam targeting investors. I read the article in silence. She had been forging documents, promising returns on businesses that never existed. She faced years in prison. For a moment, I felt a flicker of the sister I wished I'd had, the one who could have stood beside me against the storm. But that flicker vanished, swallowed by the reality of who she chose to become. Walter looked at me across the desk. Do you want to intervene? Offer help? I shook my head. No. Dorothy once told me justice doesn't always need our hands. Sometimes it just arrives. And so I let it arrive. That evening, I stood on the balcony of the estate, the city lights shimmering like broken glass, stitched into the horizon. For the first time in years, the weight on my chest felt lighter. Not gone, but lighter. I had spent half my life fighting to be seen, the other half fighting to survive. Now, I was building something that would outlast both battles. Dorothy's voice still lived in me. Legacy is not wealth. It is the lives we touch, the chains we break, the futures we build. And I finally understood. Their legacy was ruin. Mine was rebirth. And every child who walked through the doors of our shelters carrying nothing but fear would leave with proof. Family is not blood. Family is choice. Theirs had destroyed me. Mine would save others.